Everyone thought he was just another homeless black man until the truth came out in court. It was supposed to be over in 5 minutes. Just a routine trespassing case, slotted between a parking dispute and a landlord-tenant argument. No press, no jury, not even a full gallery. Just a tired judge, a bored prosecutor, and the kind of docket filler that barely makes a clerk glance up from their coffee. The defendant, a man found sleeping near the maintenance exit of Union Station in Chicago. No drugs, no weapons, no stolen property, just a citation for trespassing and a note from the responding officer. Resisted when asked to leave, nonviolent. Appeared disoriented. When the deputies brought him in, no one paid much attention at first. His coat was torn, oversized, the kind given out by shelters during the worst of the cold months. He shuffled more than walked, one boot dragging behind him like it didn't quite belong to the rest of him. His beard was unkempt, streaked with gray. His hands trembled slightly as he was led to the defense table. Case number 14,793, the bailiff announced. State of Illinois versus Marcus Ellison. Something about the name made the judge pause mid-note. She looked up. Ellison? She repeated, a hint of recognition flickering in her voice. The bailiff nodded. Marcus Elijah Ellison, age 58. The judge, a sharp woman named Regina Morales, narrowed her eyes at the man before her. He wasn't looking at her. In fact, he wasn't looking at anything. His gaze hovered somewhere between the edge of the table and the tiled floor. Hollow. Still. Assigned that very morning, his public defender, a nervous young attorney named Jonah Reeves, cleared his throat and stood. Your Honor, he began, voice thin. Mr. Ellison is requesting release on his own recognizance. He has no violent priors, no outstanding warrants, and— Mr. Ellison, Judge Morales interrupted softly. Can you hear me? The man raised his head just enough to meet her eyes. His voice, when it came, was coarse like wind through gravel. Yes, ma'am, I hear you. That was when the courtroom shifted. It was subtle at first. A man in the back row sat up a little straighter. A woman near the wall adjusted the scarf around her neck, revealing a veteran's emblem. Someone else whispered a name. Not loudly, just enough for someone nearby to turn. Wait, Marcus Ellison? From Fort Bragg? And suddenly, it wasn't just a trespassing charge anymore. It was something else entirely. Something no one in that courtroom had been prepared for. The bailiff looked confused as murmurs started to spread. Judge Morales raised a hand. Quiet, please, she said, though her own voice betrayed a sudden curiosity. She glanced toward the clerk, who had already begun searching the name on her terminal. Something was stirring, not just in the room, but inside her too. At the defense table, Marcus Ellison hadn't moved. He sat like stone, shoulders slouched, eyes dull. The wariness in him wasn't from fear of judgment, but from expectation. This wasn't his first courtroom, and probably not his last. Mr. Ellison, the judge tried again. Do you have family? Anyone we can contact? Marcus slowly shook his head. Not anymore, he muttered. They stopped calling when I stopped answering. Reeves, the young attorney, leaned over. Marcus, is there anything you want the court to know? Your military background, maybe? Marcus turned to him with a faint, almost bitter smile. Why? Medals don't buy rent. Memories don't count in court. That line stopped Reeves cold. But someone in the gallery stood up, a tall man in a faded bomber jacket, salt and pepper hair pulled into a short tail, eyes wide with recognition. Your Honor, he called out. May I speak? Morales blinked. Identify yourself. Carlos Medina. I served with that man in Iraq. 2004, Najaf. He saved our whole unit. Another voice. A woman with a navy blue coat stepped forward. He was in Fallujah too. My brother talked about him like he was made of steel. Reeves turned, stunned. You never mentioned any of this, he whispered. Marcus didn't answer. He just kept staring ahead like it didn't matter. But it did. Suddenly, the clerk's voice cut through. Your Honor, she said, pushing her screen toward Morales. I found something. It's a military commendation database. Marcus E. Ellison, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Joint Task Force, 77th Division, former Sergeant First Class. A hush fell again. Judge Morales leaned back, her expression unreadable. Mr. Ellison, is this accurate? Marcus raised his eyes for the first time since walking in. It was. Once. She looked at him. Really looked at him now. Not as a homeless man in tattered clothes, but as someone history had quietly discarded. Someone who had carried men through war and now couldn't carry himself across a courtroom. Mr. Ellison, she said quietly, how did you get here? He took a breath. It was shallow, cracked by time and pain. I came home, he said, but the war came with me. Judge Morales sat still, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of her bench. Sergeant Marcus Ellison, she repeated under her breath, as though saying it aloud might help the pieces fall into place. She remembered something, an old article maybe, or a name mentioned once in a congressional hearing. But none of it prepared her for the man slumped in front of her, nearly unrecognizable beneath years of wear. Sergeant Ellison, she said again, this time with full intention. Did you serve in Joint Task Force 77, Operation Phantom Fury? Marcus's lips twitched faintly. Used to. Before the sand got in my lungs and the noise got in my head. There it was again. That stark, raw honesty. Not dramatic, not self-pitying, just real. Someone in the audience let out a slow exhale, and another man stood up, an older gentleman with a veteran's pin on his lapel. He was the one who ran back into that burning compound in Najaf, the man said, dragged out 3 men before the second blast. That was in Stars and Stripes. I clipped the article. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't even nod. You'd think they were talking about someone else. I thought he was dead, the man added, all these years. The murmurs returned, not chaotic, but reverent. Recognition was spreading like ink in water. Reeves stood frozen beside Marcus, overwhelmed. Your Honor, he said, I respectfully request a recess. I need time to fully understand who my client is. But Judge Morales shook her head. No, we don't need time. We need to listen. She turned to Marcus again. What happened after you returned home? His eyes dropped to the table, his voice low. I tried. Enrolled in night school, worked warehouse jobs. But the noise didn't stop. Couldn't sleep, couldn't sit in a crowded room without feeling like I was back under fire. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed. They gave me pills, but they made me feel like I was watching myself from across the street. I stopped taking them. Then I lost the jobs. Then the apartment. Then everything else. Reeves placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, but Marcus didn't react. I reached out once, Marcus added. Called the VA. Waited 6 weeks for a callback. By then, I was on a park bench and I figured maybe that's where they wanted me. You could hear a pin drop. Morales closed the file in front of her, fingers tight around the edge. You were a hero once, Mr. Ellison. Marcus gave a bitter laugh. That was a long time ago. Heroes don't sleep under subway vents. Maybe not, she said, but they shouldn't be forgotten either. No one in the courtroom moved for a long while. The judge's words hung in the air, echoing in the stillness like a bell after it's been rung. Even the court stenographer, typically unfazed by emotion, had paused mid-keystroke. It wasn't that people didn't know what to say. It was that suddenly saying anything at all felt inadequate. Then something quiet, almost imperceptible, happened. One man in the back row stood up. No announcement, no request. Just a silent gesture of respect. He stood tall, his hands folded in front of him, a small Navy insignia pinned to his blazer. A second person, an older woman with streaks of gray in her braids and an Air Force badge on her purse, stood next, then a third, then a fourth. In less than a minute, half the courtroom was on its feet. Ill. Marcus didn't notice at first. He was still looking at the defense table, his eyes lowered, his mind clearly elsewhere. But Judge Morales did. She looked past the worn figure in front of her and saw something else taking shape. A quiet honoring of a man who had once been larger than life, now crumpled by years of silence. Mr. Ellison, she said gently. He glanced up. I want to ask you something, and you're free not to answer. But I need to understand the whole picture. He nodded faintly. Go ahead. You were honorably discharged in 2006. What happened after that? Not just the work. You. Inside. Marcus took a long breath and leaned back in his chair, like the words he was about to say had waited years to come out. I came back, but I didn't really come home. The war stuck with me, stuck to me. In the shower, in traffic, in dreams. The fireworks on the 4th of July, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Sometimes I thought I'd never left. He paused. No one interrupted. My wife tried. She stayed 2 years longer than she should have. But I wasn't sleeping, and when I did, I screamed. I was angry, jumpy, tired of feeling like a burden. I told her to take our daughter and go somewhere safe. Somewhere I couldn't ruin things. His hands tightened into fists on the table. I thought I'd get help. I called, filled out forms, stood in lines. But it was always another delay. Another letter in the mail saying, claim denied, or insufficient documentation. After a while, you start to wonder if you're even real anymore. Across the room, someone sniffled. Then another. Soleil. You stop fighting for help. You just try to survive. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was heavy, sacred, the weight of a man's pain finally given shape. And yet, through it all, Marcus hadn't asked for sympathy, hadn't begged for mercy. He spoke like a man who didn't expect to be saved. That was when the courtroom doors opened again. A man stepped in, a figure of authority, confident and clean-cut, wearing a tailored gray suit and military pins on his chest. He paused, scanned the room, then made his way forward with calm purpose. Judge Morales raised her eyebrows. Can I help you? He nodded, eyes on Marcus. I'm not here in any official capacity, Your Honor. I'm here because this man saved my life. The man adjusted his tie, then looked directly at Marcus. You probably don't remember me, he said, voice steady. But I remember you, Ramadi. 2005. Convoy hit an IED. You pulled me out of the wreckage. My leg was shattered and the truck was on fire. You didn't even hesitate. Marcus squinted, his expression shifting from confusion to faint recognition. You were the medic, he said slowly. Kept asking if I could see your bag. You'd lost it in the blast. The man smiled, relief flashing across his face. You do remember. Reeves looked between them, stunned. Who are you? The man turned slightly. Name's Major William Grant, now Assistant Director at the Veterans Recovery Network here in Illinois. He looked back at the judge. I'm not here as an official. I'm here as a man who wouldn't be standing if it weren't for Sergeant Marcus Ellison. The effect was immediate. Gasps rippled through the gallery. A few more people rose to their feet. Others bowed their heads. Not in shame, but reverence. Even the prosecutor, a by-the-book woman named Amanda Cho, blinked slowly as she lowered her pen, finally seeing not a defendant, but a man lost between the cracks. Judge Morales folded her hands. Mr. Grant, are you suggesting an alternative to prosecution? I'm suggesting what should have happened 10 years ago, he replied. Support, housing, trauma counseling, someone to walk beside him instead of watching him fall. Marcus let out a long breath and slouched a little deeper into his chair. I'm not asking for handouts, he murmured. I'm not some war movie comeback story. I just got tired of screaming at doors that wouldn't open. You're not asking for anything, Grant said gently. That's the problem. You gave everything and expected nothing in return. Morales turned to the prosecutor. Ms. Cho? She stood slowly. Your Honor, I've already contacted the VA. Mr. Ellison's file is a mess. Lost paperwork, unprocessed appeals, records marked incomplete. I believe he did seek help. The system just didn't care. Would you object to conditional dismissal based on successful completion of a rehabilitation program through the VRN? Cho paused. Then, no objection, Your Honor. He deserves that much. All eyes turned to Marcus. He didn't speak right away. I've been invisible for a long time, he finally said, voice raw. Hard to believe people are seeing me now. Grant stepped closer. We see you, Sergeant. And in that moment, the name Marcus Ellison didn't just echo, it resonated. Through uniforms past and present, through regrets and second chances, through every quiet hero who walked home from war and got lost in the noise. The courtroom didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like a pause in time, a place where the law, for once, stopped moving fast enough to listen. Judge Morales sat quietly for a moment, absorbing it all. Then she leaned forward, elbows on the bench. "Mr. Ellison," she said gently, "I'd like to hear about what happened after the war, not just the facts, the part no one writes down." Marcus hesitated, then shifted in his seat. You could see the resistance in his shoulders, the instinct to shut it all away. But maybe, just maybe, he was finally tired of carrying it alone. "I came back in 2006, he began slowly. "They told me I was cleared for civilian life. I had a bag, a citation, and a train ticket. No map, no plan." He stared at his hands. "I tried to fit in, got a job as a janitor at a high school. Kids slammed lockers and I'd hit the floor. I'd wake up in the middle of the night grabbing for a rifle I didn't have. My wife, Naomi, she tried to understand. But I couldn't explain it. Couldn't explain why I'd stare at the wall for hours, why loud music made my skin crawl." He swallowed hard. "She left in 2009, took our daughter, said she had to protect her from growing up in a house full of ghosts." Reeves bowed his head. Grant clenched his jaw. Marcus kept going. "I bounced around after that. A mechanic shop, security work, delivery runs, but I'd lose it. Not yelling, just shutting down, like a fuse blew in my head. Employers stopped calling, friends stopped asking." He looked up at the judge. "Ever try filling out a job app when the address you give is a park bench under the overpass?" No one answered. France V. A had a hotline. I called, got put on hold, transferred 5 times, then the line dropped. That was the last time I tried. France, he rubbed the side of his face. I didn't want pity, I just didn't want to disappear. There it was. The truth under all the silence. Marcus Ellison hadn't fallen into this life. He'd been left in it. Judge Morales let out a quiet breath, then turned to the bailiff. "Please contact the Veterans Justice Outreach Office. See if there's an intake slot today." Then to Grant. "Can your organization assist with temporary housing and intake therapy?" Grant nodded. Already reserved him a bed. "We've been waiting for this kind of moment." Finally, she turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Ellison," she said, voice warm but firm, "would you accept this help, not as a handout, but as recognition for what you've already given?" Marcus didn't nod right away. Then slowly he whispered, "I'll try." And with those 2 words, everything in the room shifted again, not just in perception, but in purpose. The courtroom wasn't just about law that day. It was about redemption. The court recessed for 15 minutes, but no one left the room. Some stood quietly in the aisles. Others sat in reflective silence. The name Marcus Ellison now carried weight, not just the sound of it, but the stories behind it. A name once buried under paperwork and silence had become something sacred, something earned. When the court resumed, Marcus sat a little straighter. Still tired, still worn, but seen. For the first time in years, he wasn't just another lost man in the system. He was a person again. Judge Morales tapped her gavel softly. "Back on the record," she said. Prosecutor Cho stood first. "Your Honor," she began, her voice quieter than usual, "I've reviewed the files provided by the Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr. Ellison's records are extensive and tragic." She held up a thin folder. "This is his case file. 4 appeals. 2 listed as lost in transit. 1 marked as incomplete due to a clerical error. And the last? Flagged as not urgent." She looked down at the paper, then back up at Marcus. "I believe this man tried," she said. "But the system didn't try back." The gallery murmured in agreement. Judge Morales turned to Marcus. "Mr. Ellison, you said earlier you felt invisible, that you didn't think anyone would care." Marcus gave a faint nod. "I want to be clear," she continued. "This courtroom cares. This community cares. And it's time we start proving it." She reached beside her and lifted a sealed folder. "I've contacted the Illinois Veterans Justice Outreach Program. You've been assigned a caseworker. Your first appointment is tomorrow morning. Mr. Grant's organization will transport you and provide transitional housing, meals, and trauma counseling." Marcus blinked slowly. That's a lot. It's not charity, Grant interjected, it's restoration, Morales added. Your charges will be conditionally dismissed pending successful completion of the program. I'll monitor your progress personally. If you walk this path, we'll walk it with you. Marcus looked around the room, at the faces, the eyes that now looked at him differently. Not like a case, not like a cautionary tale, but like a man coming in from the cold. Oh, he swallowed hard, voice scratchy. I didn't expect this. Judge Morales smiled gently. Most heroes don't. Then she rose from the bench. In recognition of his service, his struggle, and his willingness to begin again, the court hereby places Mr. Marcus Ellison into the care of the Veterans Recovery Network. Court adjourned. The gavel tapped. No cheers, no applause, just quiet respect. As Marcus stood to leave, Reeves touched his arm. We're not done yet, the young lawyer said. But this is a good start. Marcus nodded. Yeah, for once, I think it is. And as he turned to follow Grant toward the doors, he passed a woman in the hallway. She looked older, her coat worn, her eyes red-rimmed, but familiar. She stepped forward, voice trembling. Marcus? He froze. Naomi? He breathed. She nodded. Your daughter, she found me last week, said someone saw you. I didn't believe it. But then this article online. He couldn't speak, just stared. She stepped closer. I'm not here to reopen old wounds. I just wanted you to know she wants to see you. Marcus's voice cracked. Is she okay? She's strong, Naomi whispered. Just like her father, Marcus sat on the edge of the bed that night in the small, clean room Grant's organization had provided. It wasn't much, a cot, a desk, a lamp that flickered a little when it turned on, but it had a lock on the door and a folded blanket that smelled like detergent, not the street. His fatigue jacket, the one he'd worn since the last time he could remember feeling whole, lay across the chair. For the first time in years, he had a pillow that wasn't a balled-up coat and a roof that didn't echo with sirens, but sleep didn't come easily. He kept replaying Naomi's voice in the hallway, the way her eyes didn't judge him, just searched for the version of him she once knew. He thought of his daughter's name, which he hadn't spoken aloud in nearly a decade. He wondered what her voice sounded like now, if she hated him, if she remembered how he used to read to her before the noise in his head drowned everything else out. At breakfast the next morning, a young staff member handed him a schedule. Mr. Ellison, this is your weekly program. Counseling, group sessions, medical eval Friday. Let us know if you need adjustments. Marcus scanned the paper, then looked up. This gonna fix me? The staffer paused. No, sir, but it might help you face the parts that broke. And that's something. Later that day, during his intake with the center's trauma specialist, Dr. Lin, Marcus sat stiffly in a too-soft chair, answering questions with shrugs and one-word sentences. Until she asked, do you remember the day you stopped asking for help? He didn't answer at first. Then, yeah, he whispered. January 12th, 2010. I went into the VA downtown. They told me I needed another form, said I was missing a signature. I'd waited 3 hours. That was the third time they said it. I left. Didn't go back. Dr. Lin nodded gently. Do you remember how you felt? Like I'd died over there and no one had told me. They sat in silence. Then Marcus said something so raw, she stopped writing. Noof. You don't trade medals for shelter. That's not how it works. You come home a hero for a week, and after that, you're just another problem. She didn't argue. Instead, she said, you survived more than most ever will. That doesn't make you broken, Marcus. It makes you human. He didn't reply, but something in his shoulders loosened, just a little. That weekend, he attended his first group session. 7 veterans, most with eyes that darted too fast and hands that never fully rested. No one spoke at first. Then one man told a story about sleeping in a stairwell for 6 months before anyone offered him a meal. Marcus didn't share that day, but he listened, and for once, he didn't feel like a ghost in the room. The following Monday, the courtroom in Union Station's annex filled again, not for a trial, but for a review hearing. Judge Morales wanted a formal update on Marcus Ellison's progress. It was supposed to be procedural, quick, routine, but by the time Marcus entered, The gallery was half full, not with spectators but with veterans. B. Some in wheelchairs, others in uniforms that had long since faded. A few younger ones in plain clothes who sat with a rigid posture and silent reverence. Word had spread, not just about a case, but about a man, a name, a second chance. Judge Morales entered without fanfare. She glanced across the room, her eyes pausing for a fraction of a second on Marcus. Mike. He stood a little taller now. Same jacket, but his beard was trimmed, and the shadows beneath his eyes weren't as deep. A folder in his hand held attendance records, medical summaries, a therapist's letter. Grant stood beside him, offering a quiet nod of support. "Mr. Ellison," the judge said, "thank you for returning. I've received your initial reports from the Veterans Recovery Network." Before she could continue, a voice rose from the back. "Your Honor, may I speak?" She looked up. "State your name." "Lieutenant Devin Marks, retired. U.S. Army. Mr. Ellison was my squad leader during Operation Dawn Break in 2004. I wouldn't be standing if it weren't for him." The judge allowed a nod. "You may proceed." Marks stepped forward. "There was a raid, wrong intel. We were pinned under fire for hours. Sergeant Ellison stayed calm when we were losing our minds. He coordinated our escape, patched up 2 of us with nothing but duct tape and prayer. He didn't run, he didn't sleep, he led." He looked at Marcus. "I watched him fall apart later, and I never once blamed him. The system failed him. He never failed us." Another voice rose from the other side of the gallery. "He carried me after my leg was gone," said an older man with a cane. "Didn't even hesitate. I passed out, woke up in a Humvee with his jacket wrapped around my stump." One by one they stood. U.S. A nurse from a field hospital. A translator. A supply sergeant. Betcha. Even Amanda Cho, the prosecutor, stood and said, "I've handled over 400 cases in this building, but none that made me question what justice really means the way this one has." Marcus didn't speak. His throat had tightened too much to form words. The judge sat still, letting the moment linger, letting it mean something. "Mr. Ellison," she finally said, "do you understand what you've done for these people?" "I don't know," he rasped. "I never thought it would matter." "It matters," she said firmly. "You matter." And as he nodded slowly, almost dazed, you could see the shift, not just in his face, but in his entire being. For the first time in years, Marcus Ellison wasn't disappearing. He was reappearing. That night, Marcus sat on the bench outside the shelter, watching the city blur around him. Car headlights passed like ghosts. A cold wind carried the sound of distant laughter, sirens, and a harmonica played by someone he couldn't see. He held a styrofoam cup of black coffee in both hands, not for the warmth, but because it gave them something to do, something to hold besides memory. Behind him, inside the center, the world was cleaner, brighter, promising. But Marcus had learned not to trust promises. That morning's hearing still echoed in his ears, not the praise, not the standing ovations, not even the judge's voice, but the stories, the way they spoke of him, like he was someone else, like that version of Marcus Ellison hadn't been left behind in the sand. Because the truth was, he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a ghost in borrowed skin. The pain he carried didn't announce itself. It sat quietly. It crept into the corners of his nights and curled into his ribs like smoke. And when it stayed too long, it silenced everything else, until all he heard was nothing. Dr. Lin had asked him earlier that day, "Do you ever feel angry at the world?" He had laughed, dry and tired. "No, I feel erased." That was harder to explain. Anger you could yell, grief you could cry, but erasure just sat in your chest, pressing down until you forgot the shape of your own voice. He stared down at the scars on his knuckles, one from a broken Humvee hatch, another from grabbing barbed wire with bare hands in Basra. All of them told stories no one ever asked about. Until now, Maxwell's Bahamo. A door opened behind him. Naomi stepped outside, arms wrapped tight around herself, not from cold but from history. "I didn't want to interrupt," she said softly. "I just wanted to sit." He nodded. She sat beside him on the bench, leaving a space between them, not out of fear. Out of respect for distance that had been earned, not assumed. After a few moments she said, "She's proud of you, you know." He didn't have to ask who. She's nervous, but proud. Marcus looked down. What do I even say after all these years? Naomi shrugged, her voice barely above a whisper. Start with, I'm still here. That's more than most ever get to say. They sat in silence again. This time, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't haunted. It was healing. And somewhere deep in the quiet, Marcus felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Not regret, not grief. Hope, small, fragile, but real. The next morning, Marcus stood in front of a mirror in the shelter bathroom, staring at a face he barely recognized. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly. His fatigue shirt, now washed and neatly buttoned, hung loose on his shoulders, and the gray in his beard seemed more visible today than yesterday. He reached up and traced the small scar on his temple, shrapnel from a mortar strike outside Fallujah. It used to ache when it rained. Now it just reminded him that he'd made it home, or at least to the edge of it. During group that afternoon, Dr. Lin posed a question. What does home mean to you now? There was silence at first. Then Marcus spoke. I used to think it was a place, a house, a front door I had a key to. But when I came back, it didn't feel like that anymore. The others listened. I tried to go home, he said, voice even, but it was like walking into someone else's life. My daughter had learned how to ride a bike while I was overseas. My wife had learned how to sleep alone. I was a guest in my own kitchen. He looked down. And the worst part? I kept trying to act like it wasn't broken, like if I smiled hard enough I'd start to believe it. A woman in the group nodded slowly. I used to put my uniform on just to feel real. Even after discharge, like if I saw myself in the mirror that way, I'd remember who I was. Marcus looked at her, and for the first time in weeks he smiled. Not out of politeness, but understanding. Home, he said, used to be a place. But maybe now it's just the people who don't give up on you, even when you already did. After group, he found himself walking through the center side garden. Nothing fancy, just a patch of mulch, a few benches, and some planted flowers that looked like they were trying their best in spite of the cold. Grant caught up with him there, holding 2 cups of coffee. You spoke up today, Grant said, handing one over. Marcus took it, nodded. Didn't plan to. Most good things aren't planned. They sat in quiet for a while. Then Grant asked, what would it take for you to feel like you've really come home? Marcus exhaled slowly. I don't know, he said. Maybe the day I can wake up and not expect the worst. Or the day I stop apologizing just for being here. Grant didn't answer. He just sat with him, shoulder to shoulder, like a friend who understood. And in that small garden, surrounded by struggling flowers and cool wind, Marcus realized something profound. Maybe home wasn't something you return to. Maybe it's something you rebuild. One conversation, one breath, one step at a time. Weeks passed. Marcus kept showing up. Every session, every check-in, every quiet morning where someone asked, how are you today? And genuinely waited for the answer. The Marcus who had once sat slouched and hollow in courtroom 3B had started walking taller, not because the weight on his shoulders had disappeared, but because, for the first time in years, he wasn't carrying it alone. Judge Morales continued to check in through brief court updates. Grant submitted progress reports. Dr. Lin's notes described Marcus as engaged, responsive, and cautiously hopeful. Even Cho, the once steely prosecutor, sent a letter to the court recommending Marcus's full diversion from the system. But the moment that caught everyone by surprise happened not in the courtroom, but in a classroom. The center had a program called Rebuild Through Purpose, vocational training for veterans, welding, carpentry, HVAC, basic auto repair. Marcus signed up for all of them. He wasn't looking for a new career, he was looking for something to keep his hands busy when his mind wasn't safe. One Friday afternoon, after helping fix a broken heating unit in the shelter's kitchen, a younger vet named Ty pulled him aside. Hey man, Ty said, eyes darting. You were that guy in court, right? The one they all stood up for? Marcus didn't know how to answer, but Ty kept going. I watched it on YouTube, he said, sheepish. That part where you said you didn't stop being somebody, you just stopped being seen? That hit me hard. Marcus blinked. Ty added, I was arrested last year. Assault. VA didn't pick up the phone. I snapped. Judge didn't care. Nobody stood up for me. Marcus exhaled slowly. I didn't think anyone would stand for me either. But they did. Yeah, they did. Ty hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever think we could get better? Like, really better?" Marcus thought about that. He looked around the room, the toolbox in the corner, the hum of the heater they'd just fixed, the low sound of two vets joking behind the vending machine. He thought of his daughter's voice over the phone last week. "You sound more like you." Then he answered, "I don't think it happens all at once," he said. "But I think if you wake up and try again, that counts." That evening, Grant wrote a note in Marcus's case file. It was short. "Progress not measured in paperwork today, but in dignity returned. Marcus Ellison is no longer just a name on a docket. He's becoming a man with a future. And that trespassing charge, the one that brought Marcus into court, it was never about the crime. It was a cry for help." And finally, after years of silence, the right people were listening. The final follow-up hearing had been scheduled for the end of the month. The courtroom was packed this time, not out of obligation, but out of choice. Veterans from around the county, social workers, former prosecutors, even a few local high school students who had read about the case in a civics class and asked to attend. Marcus entered wearing a clean button-down shirt over his old fatigue tee. He didn't drag his boots anymore. He walked with purpose, even if a bit slow. His file now included over a dozen counseling sessions, 3 vocational certificates, and a housing application marked approved. Judge Morales smiled faintly when she saw him. "Mr. Ellison," she said, tapping the folder in front of her, "it appears you've done more in the last 30 days than most defendants do in a year." Marcus gave a soft chuckle. "I guess I finally ran out of reasons not to try." Before the hearing could proceed, someone stood in the back of the room. He was in his early 40s, wearing a dark suit and a pin that gleamed on his chest, a small bronze eagle. "Your Honor," he said, voice clear. "Permission to speak?" Judge Morales tilted her head. "Please identify yourself." "Assistant District Attorney Sam Rhodes," the man said, "but I'm not here today in that role." She gave a small nod. "Go on." Rhodes stepped forward slowly, pausing halfway to the bench. 14 years ago, I was pinned inside a burning transport outside Mosul. My driver had taken the worst of it. I was half conscious, bleeding, couldn't move. He turned to Marcus. I remember a hand grabbing my vest, dragging me out, shielding my face from the flames. I blacked out before I saw who it was. He took a breath. 3 months ago, I read a news article. Your name came up. A photo. Something clicked. I went back through old military reports, cross-referenced times and units. It was you. Marcus blinked. I didn't know you were in that wreck. I just remember the fire. Rhodes nodded, smiling. You saved me, Sergeant. You didn't even hesitate. I never got to say thank you. The courtroom was still. Marcus looked around, suddenly self-conscious. I wasn't the only one who pulled people out that night. No, Rhodes agreed. But you pulled me. Then, turning to the judge, I've prosecuted hundreds of veterans over the years, and too many times I've seen men like him disappear into the system without anyone asking why they ended up there. He gestured toward Marcus. This man didn't need a cell. He needed a second chance. And somehow, against all odds, he got one. I think that deserves more than just a conditional dismissal. It deserves recognition. Judge Morales nodded slowly. Noted. Rhodes returned to his seat. Marcus sat down again, quieter now. But in his silence, there was no shame, no hiding. Just the slow, steady settling of truth being heard. The room had changed, not just in mood, not just in the way people looked at Marcus Ellison, but in the way they looked at the system. For once, justice didn't feel like cold procedure. It felt human, earned, alive. Judge Morales leaned forward on the bench, her expression no longer one of formality, but of careful, deliberate thought. This court, she said, was never meant to be a place of punishment alone. It is, when needed. But in cases like this, she glanced at Marcus, it must also be a place of reckoning, of responsibility, not just for the individual, but for the system that failed them. She turned toward the gallery. Too often we ask veterans to return from battlefields and pretend nothing has changed. We expect them to integrate, perform, show up, and stay silent about the nightmares that wake them at 3 a.m. When they falter, we ask, "What's wrong with you?" instead of, "What happened to you?" The room was silent. This isn't just a case file, she said. It's a mirror. She looked at Marcus again, her voice softer now. "You were never broken, Mr. Ellison. You were buried. Under red tape, bad policy, and years of silence. And yet, you kept going. That matters." Marcus looked down, eyes glassy. He didn't speak, but the slight tremble of his jaw said enough. Morales lifted the final form in front of her. "Based on the completion of all conditions, this court dismisses the original charges of trespassing and resisting without prejudice. Furthermore, I submit a recommendation for permanent housing support through the Illinois Veterans Stabilization Fund and nominate Mr. Ellison for recognition through the Valor Transition Initiative." Reeves, Marcus's attorney, blinked twice as he took it in. "That's more than I expected, Your Honor." The judge gave a wry smile. "It's the least we can do." Then she leaned toward Marcus. "And Mr. Ellison, one last thing." He looked up. "If there ever comes a day when you question your worth again, remember this room." He gave a slow nod. "Yes, ma'am." As the gavel tapped once more, no one rushed to leave. People stayed in their seats. Some shook hands. Others sat in quiet reflection. This wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It was the moment where one man's tragedy stopped being a footnote and became a turning point, not just for him, but for everyone who had stopped seeing people like him. As the crowd slowly began to file out of the courtroom, Marcus lingered near the defense table, his fingers grazing the edge like he wasn't quite ready to let go of the moment. He wasn't smiling, not yet, but his expression had changed. The weariness was still there, but now it shared space with something new, weightless disbelief. Naomi stepped toward him from the side aisle. She hadn't spoken during the hearing, hadn't needed to. Her presence had spoken volumes. "Nai. You okay?" she asked softly. Marcus gave a faint nod. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel." "Maybe you don't need to feel everything yet," she said. "Maybe just start with feeling seen." He looked at her then, really looked. Years of space between them seemed to narrow into inches. Her eyes held something both familiar and foreign, forgiveness. Not pity, not regret, just a hand reaching back across time. "I'm not the man you married," Marcus said, voice low. "I know," she replied, "but I see pieces of him again, pieces I thought were gone." He looked down, ashamed. "I let so much fall apart." Naomi stepped closer. "You were fighting battles no one saw, but you're still here. That means something." He turned to walk with her toward the exit, but before they reached the door, someone called out, "Mr. Ellison?" A teenage girl stood in the hall, maybe 16, with curls pulled back into a ponytail and a nervous grip on her backpack. Naomi froze. Marcus's breath caught. "Alyssa?" She nodded slowly. "Hi." He stood motionless, unsure whether to reach out or back away. "I didn't know if I should come," she said quickly, "but Mom told me what happened, and I wanted to see for myself." Marcus opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Alyssa took a tentative step forward. "I used to have this memory," she said, "of you holding me on your shoulders during the fireworks. I thought it was a dream for the longest time. But it was real, wasn't it?" Marcus nodded, his voice a whisper. "Yeah, it was real." She smiled. "I want more real memories." He blinked. "You'd want that? After everything?" Alyssa looked between him and Naomi, then said gently, "You're still worth saving, Dad. You always were." And with that, she opened her arms and stepped in. He didn't hesitate. He folded her into his embrace like he'd waited an entire lifetime for it. And maybe he had. His shoulders shook as he held her, and Naomi rested her hand on his back, grounding the moment. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the years. But it was something stronger than silence. Vewet. It was a beginning. Long after the courtroom had emptied and the last voices had faded into the echoes of the hallway, Judge Regina Morales sat alone on the bench. The court reporter had packed up. The clerk had gone home. But she stayed behind, staring at the closed file of State versus Marcus Ellison with a heaviness in her chest she couldn't shake. She reached slowly into the drawer beside her and pulled out an old, folded letter. The paper was yellowing at the edges, creased down the center from years of unfolding and refolding. She laid it flat on the desk. The handwriting was blocky, precise. De hace for size. It belonged to her brother. He'd written it from Kuwait in 2005, a few weeks before he was wounded and flown home. Regina, you asked me once what keeps me going out here. It's not the medals or the mission, it's my squad leader, Sergeant Ellison. The man never yells, never panics. Just leads with this calm that makes you believe you'll make it through the night. Last week, we were ambushed. He pulled 2 guys out of a flip truck while it was burning. Just a quiet, "We're not done yet," and back into the chaos he went. I don't think he sleeps, but he makes sure we do. If I don't make it home, know that I did my best under a man who deserved a world that would remember him. She had read that letter 100 times over the years. It had comforted her when her brother came home, barely able to walk. It had inspired her to become a judge. But she had never expected the man in those words, the silent hero, to someday show up in her courtroom in shackles and an oversized coat. She hadn't made the connection right away. How could she? Time wears down memories the same way weather wears stone, but once she heard the name Ellison and saw the man's eyes, she knew. That letter, once a symbol of courage, had become something else entirely. A reminder of how easy it is to forget the people who never asked to be remembered. She folded the paper again and tucked it into her pocket, not out of habit, but out of duty. She would carry it now not as a keepsake, but as a responsibility. Then she stood, grabbed her coat, and switched off the courtroom lights. The next day, Marcus sat in the community library tucked inside the Veterans Resource Center, a quiet corner filled with worn chairs, warm light, and donated books with cracked spines. He wasn't reading. He was just sitting, a cup of lukewarm tea in his hands, watching the way the sunlight pooled on the floor like it hadn't done in the dark corners of his life for years. Across from him sat a woman in a gray pantsuit with a notepad balanced on her knee. She was from a local news outlet. They'd asked for a short profile, just a few lines on veterans rehabilitation. But once she heard his name, she asked if they could speak. Marcus hesitated at first. He never liked the spotlight, never trusted it. But after everything that had happened, maybe it was time to let someone else carry the story for a while. "Fori Sama, you were the man from the courtroom, right?" she asked gently. "The one who served in Operation Phantom Fury?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I was there. And now you're part of the Veterans Justice Outreach Program." He gave a half smile. "I guess you could say I'm in recovery. Not just from war, but from being invisible." She tapped her pen. "If you don't mind me asking, what do you think justice means now, after everything?" He stared at her for a long moment before answering. "Justice," he said, voice steady, "used to mean punishment. At least to me. You mess up, you pay the price. Black and white, no excuses." He looked out the window. A bird landed on the sill and tilted its head at him, curious. "But now," he continued, "I think justice can wear a different face. Sometimes, it looks like a judge pausing long enough to see you, or a stranger stepping forward just to say, 'He saved me.' Sometimes it looks like a daughter walking into a hallway and calling you Dad again." He turned back to the reporter. "Justice isn't just about balance. It's about restoration. Giving someone the tools to become themselves again. Not the soldier, not the file number. Just the man." She stopped writing. "Do you think you're becoming that man again?" He didn't answer right away, but after a beat he said, "I'm learning to stop apologizing for surviving." 2 weeks later, a ceremony was held at the Toledo Civic Center. Small, unpublicized, but meaningful. The mayor had partnered with the Veterans Recovery Network to recognize individuals who had completed the first phase of reintegration. The final name on the list was read slowly and clearly: Sergeant Marcus Elijah Ellison. He hadn't expected fanfare. He didn't want it. But as he rose from his seat near the back of the hall and stepped forward in his neatly pressed fatigue shirt, clean, ironed, and button proud, The entire room stood, not just veterans, not just officials, everyone. Some saluted, some placed hands over hearts, a few simply bowed their heads. The applause didn't erupt. It built. Slow, steady, respectful, like a wave that rose not for spectacle but for something sacred. Marcus reached the podium, cleared his throat, and leaned toward the microphone. "Dodd, I was gone for a long time," he said, his voice low and steady. "Not just from this city, but from myself." He paused. Not out of hesitation, but gravity. "I ain't perfect. And I'm still hurting. But I'm trying." Silence followed. Welcoming, not awkward. He glanced at the crowd and saw Naomi near the aisle, Alyssa beside her, arms gently folded. Grant was there too. Dr. Lynn. Reeves. Even Judge Morales, standing quietly in the back, no robe, just a proud look on her face. "Allowed," Marcus continued. "Yoa, if there's someone out there like me, someone who thinks it's too late, that no one sees you anymore, you're wrong." He swallowed. "You're not forgotten. You still matter." A murmur swept through the room, like wind passing through a grove of trees. Marcus took a breath and said the last words, not for the audience, but for the man he once was, the one who slept behind grocery stores, unheard and unseen. That's the truth this courtroom taught me. Behind every man sitting in the back row, behind every name in a file, is a story we haven't heard yet. Then he stepped back from the microphone. And the room didn't just stand. Magi too. It remembered. The following Monday morning, Marcus stood once again at the entrance of the Veterans Resource Center. Not as a newcomer, not as a client unsure if he belonged, but as a man with a keycard in his pocket and a laminated volunteer badge clipped to his shirt. He'd been asked to help lead orientation sessions for incoming veterans. Not as a man, Rainans. Just 3 months ago, he couldn't look people in the eye. Now other men and women, some still haunted by things they wouldn't say out loud, were looking to him for steadiness. "Name's Marcus," he told a group of 6 seated in a semicircle. "I'm not here to fix you. I'm just here to tell you that it's okay to take up space again." One man fidgeted with the brim of his cap. A woman leaned forward with arms crossed tightly. A younger vet stared blankly at the wall. Marcus remembered being all 3. "This place won't give you back everything you lost," he continued. "But it might give you the tools to build what's next." After the session, as the group filed out, one of them, Ty, the same young vet who had once asked Marcus if healing was real, clapped him on the back. "You sounded like a teacher up there." Marcus shook his head, smirking. "I'm just someone who finally stopped walking alone." In the office down the hall, Dr. Lynn watched through the window, arms folded. She said nothing, just smiled. Later that afternoon, Marcus met with Judge Morales in her chambers. Not for court, not for paperwork, just coffee and conversation. "You look lighter," she said, setting down her mug. "Still heavy some days," Marcus admitted, "but now I know where to take it." She nodded. "You've earned that strength." He looked at her, the judge who could have sentenced him, and instead saw him. "I used to think the system only knew how to punish," he said. "Now I know sometimes it just needs people inside it willing to choose compassion over convenience." She smiled. "Justice doesn't have to be cold. Sometimes it starts with a door that opens instead of one that locks." As he stood to leave, she extended a small envelope toward him. "What's this?" "A copy of the letter your name was in," she said softly. "From my brother, the one that brought me to law school." Marcus stared at it. "I think he'd be proud of both of us," she said. He didn't open it. "Not yet. Some things are sacred. Some things wait for quiet." As he stepped out of her office and into the golden hallway light, Marcus didn't feel like a case anymore. Or a file. Or a name people stood for once and then forgot. He felt like a man with a path. Not backward, not even forward, just homeward. The rain had started to fall lightly that evening. Not a storm, just a hush, like the city exhaling. Marcus sat beneath the metal awning outside the shelter's back entrance, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely, watching drops bead on the edge of the overhang. Beside him was a folded letter, the one Judge Morales had given him. He hadn't opened it yet. He wasn't sure if he was ready. Naomi found him there. "Thought I might find you outside," she said gently. "Still don't like sleeping when it rains," Marcus replied. even under a roof. She didn't press him. She just sat down beside him. They sat like that for a while, quiet, steady, close. Then she reached into her bag and handed him something. It was a photograph, a little worn at the corners, but still vibrant. It showed a young Marcus, in uniform, smiling wide with a toddler on his shoulders. Alyssa, maybe 2 or 3. They were at a 4th of July picnic, the background blurry, the moment clear. "I found it in a box at Mom's," Naomi said, "but you might want to have it again." Marcus took it carefully, like it might break in his hands. "I barely remember that day," he said. "I do," she said. "You stayed until the fireworks ended, even though the noise nearly broke you. You held it together, for her." He looked at the photo. He didn't see a soldier. He didn't even see himself. Ochaklo. He saw what mattered. Mochchaklo. Then he whispered it again, like he had in court, like he had to Grant, like he had to himself in the mirror just that morning. "All right, I'll try." And that was it. No big declaration, no music swelling in the background, just those words. And Naomi? She didn't cry. She just reached over and squeezed his hand. That's all anyone can ask. The rain began to let up. A streetlight flickered on. And somewhere deep in Marcus's chest, beneath the years of silence, beneath the battles, beneath the guilt, a new kind of strength stirred. Not the kind you use to pull men from fire, the kind you use to pull yourself from darkness. One step, one breath, one try at a time. The next morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't beg for attention, just offers it. No alarms, no barking orders. Just the slow hum of a city waking up, and Marcus Ellison sitting on the edge of his new bed, breathing. He hadn't had night terrors. Not last night. For the first time in over a decade. Dejo! The cot wasn't soft, the room wasn't fancy, but it had walls that didn't echo with trauma, and a door that closed without locking from the outside. He stood, stretched, and reached for the paper bag on the nightstand, the one with his essentials, socks, a worn comb, and the photo Naomi had given him. He slid the picture into the frame above his desk. It didn't feel like hanging up the past. It felt like anchoring himself to something worth becoming again. In the dining room, a young staffer waved at him. "Morning, Mr. Ellison. Coffee's fresh." He nodded, poured himself a cup, and sat near the window. The light cut across the table like a blessing. No one rushed him. No one asked him to perform. He was just there. Around him, others ate, chatted. Some sat in silence, just grateful to have something warm. Dr. Lin joined him mid-morning with a clipboard and a gentle smile. "Medical evals in an hour," she said. Marcus took a sip of his coffee. "I passed my last one. This one's different. This one's for you, not for paperwork." He raised an eyebrow. She explained, "It's about understanding where you are now, not where you were forced to be." Marcus leaned back and nodded. "Let's see how broken I still am." Dr. Lin didn't correct him. Instead, she said, "You're not broken. You're surviving. And surviving changes shape every day." An hour later, he sat across from a doctor, young, alert, respectful. "You've got what we call complex trauma, Mr. Ellison," the doctor said. "But that doesn't mean you're damaged goods. It means you survive things most people can't imagine." Marcus looked at the clipboard in the doctor's hands, then back up. "I used to lead men through sandstorms," he said. "Now I get dizzy in a quiet room." The doctor smiled kindly. "You don't have to lead anymore, just walk, one step at a time." That line stayed with Marcus for the rest of the day. He thought about it when he saw the new guys arriving at intake, tired, wired, and scared. He thought about it when he walked past the chapel room and saw a fellow vet lighting a candle for someone they'd lost. And he thought about it as he stood at the door to his room that night, key in hand, knowing no one was going to take that door away from him again. As he stepped inside, he whispered it to himself. Just walk. And he did. Days turned into weeks. Marcus kept his routine, not out of obligation, but because for the first time in years, structure didn't feel like a cage. He woke early. He made his bed. He attended group. He walked the long hallway to the garden when he felt the world getting too loud. And each day, it got a little quieter inside his head. At first, he didn't trust it. The peace. The calm. He kept waiting for something to fall apart, for the roof to leak, for someone to yell, for his own thoughts to betray him, but they didn't. Not like before. One afternoon, while organizing tools in the vocational workshop, Marcus overheard a younger veteran in the hallway muttering into the phone. "I'm not crazy, Mom. I just can't sleep. And loud noises still mess me up." The frustration in his voice echoed something deep in Marcus's chest. He walked out into the hall, quiet but steady, and gently tapped the young man on the shoulder. "Mind if I show you something?" He led him back into the workshop, sat him down, and opened his palm. There, resting on the calloused skin of his hand, was a small metal washer, smooth, worn, nothing special. "I carried this for years," Marcus said. "Found it on the floor of a barracks in Baghdad. Picked it up the day after I lost someone in my squad. I didn't talk to anyone. Didn't cry. Just kept this in my pocket." The younger man looked confused. "Why?" Marcus's eyes softened. "Because I needed something to remind me that not everything breaks. Not everything gets lost. This thing rode in my pocket through gunfire, heat, sandstorms. It survived." He closed his hand. "And so did I." The young man blinked hard. "You ever feel like you're still broken?" he asked. Marcus shook his head. "I don't use that word anymore. I'm not broken. I'm just someone who survived things I shouldn't have had to survive alone." Later that evening, he sat with Dr. Lin for a follow-up evaluation. She reviewed his updated file. No missed sessions, no relapses, active engagement. "You've come a long way," she said. "Do you feel different?" Marcus thought about it for a while. Then, "I used to flinch when someone said my name, and now I say it first." She smiled. "That's not healing, that's ownership." Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes on the ceiling. "I still get scared," he admitted. "That means you're human," she said, "but you're also here." And in that moment, he finally let himself believe it. He wasn't a burden. He wasn't a ghost. He was a man who survived and was learning how to live again. It was a bright Saturday afternoon when Naomi and Alyssa returned, not with pity, not to check in, but simply to spend time. They met Marcus at a small park near the resource center, the kind with benches that faced a duck pond and old oak trees that creaked in the wind. He had arrived early, unsure why he was nervous, maybe because he wasn't sure if this was a reunion or a beginning. Naomi brought sandwiches. Alyssa brought questions. "What was Iraq really like?" she asked at one point, sitting cross-legged in the grass, her notebook resting on her knee. Marcus hesitated. "Loud. Hot. Lonely sometimes. But the men I served with, they were like family." Naomi chimed in. "She's working on a class project. Something about untold histories. You're her subject now." Marcus smiled at that. An actual smile. "Guess I better start remembering the good parts then." They spent the afternoon walking, talking, not avoiding the gaps in time, not forcing them either, just being. Alyssa told him about school, about wanting to become a therapist for trauma victims. "I think people need someone who listens," she said. "You'd be good at that," Marcus said. "Real good." At one point, Naomi pulled a folded sheet of paper from her bag. "I've been writing down the names of your old friends. The ones from your unit. Maybe some of them are out there. Maybe they'd want to hear from you." Marcus stared at the list, eyes sweeping over names he hadn't seen in years. "You think they'd remember me?" "I think they never forgot you," Naomi replied. Ma Lemmy, he didn't answer, but later that night back in his room he picked up a pen and began writing letters. Not long ones, just a few sentences to each name. "I'm still here." "Are you?" He didn't expect replies. He just needed to reach. The next week, something else changed. CA. Marcus received an email from the local vocational center. They were offering him a part-time mentoring role. Peer support specialist, Veterans Division. Grant had submitted his name without telling him. "You've already been doing the work," Grant said. "Now we just want to pay you for it." Marcus stared at the screen for a long time before whispering, "I guess I really am coming back." "You're not just coming back," Grant said. "You're rebuilding." By late fall, the trees around the resource center had shed most of their leaves. But inside, something was blooming. Marcus walked the hallways like someone who belonged there, not as a patient or a project, but as part of the foundation. The new veterans who arrived nervous and silent now looked to him as a kind of compass. They called him Mr. E, or just Sarge, and sometimes, when the nights were rough, they'd knock on his door just to ask, "Can I talk?" And he always answered, "Yeah, come in. You're not alone here." His small room became a gathering place. There was always a chair open, always a second mug ready. He posted a note above his desk that read, "One step, one name, one story at a time," because that's how he had come back. Not in a moment, not in a courtroom, but through 100 small steps. Like sharing a meal with his daughter each Thursday night at a diner near the lake. Like calling a fellow vet in Florida just to say, "Hey, you still breathing? Me too." Like sitting beside Naomi again, not as husband and wife, but as two people choosing to walk beside one another without forcing the destination. One day, as part of a Veterans Awareness campaign, Marcus was asked to speak at a local high school. He hesitated at first. What would kids care about someone like him? But when he stepped onto the stage and looked into their eyes, he saw curiosity, respect, hope, bechet. He didn't tell them war stories, he told them human stories. Someone like him and a someone like him, Talmugar, about what happens when people stop being seen, about how silence can become a prison, and how healing doesn't look like victory. It looks like trying again, even when you're afraid. At the end of his talk, a girl with purple hair raised her hand. "How do we help someone we know who's hurting, but won't talk?" Marcus paused. "You sit beside them anyway," he said. "Even if they don't speak. Even if they push you away. You sit there long enough to remind them they're not forgotten. Sometimes, presence is the loudest thing in the world." The auditorium was still. And then, softly, the students began to clap. Not because it was a speech, but because it was a truth they could feel. Back at the resource center that evening, Marcus sat in his room with the door cracked open. On the wall beside him were a few letters, some framed, some tacked in place. Each one from someone he'd written to weeks earlier. Each one began with the same words. "Brother, I thought you were gone." And Marcus, in the quiet, whispered back, "I was. But I found my way again. One step, one name, one story at a time." Winter came softly that year. Not the kind that bit with bitterness, but the kind that blanketed the streets in quiet reflection, gentle, deliberate, like the city itself was learning to breathe slower. On one particularly cold December morning, Marcus stood in front of a small crowd, gathered at a civic event, honoring local veterans who had gone through the full recovery and reintegration program. He hadn't planned to speak, but when they called his name, Sergeant Marcus Ellison, and he saw the faces in the crowd, some familiar, others new, something in him shifted. He stepped forward, not in uniform, not in shame, but in truth. Hell, there was no microphone, just his voice. Hell. How? I'm not used to being up here. For a long time, I didn't think I deserved to be. He scanned the group. Reeves was there, hands in his coat pocket. Grant nodded from the second row. Naomi stood beside Alyssa, their shoulders touching. Judge Morales, arms folded, watched with soft eyes. There was a time when I thought I was finished, not dead, just forgotten. Not angry, just invisible. I didn't need medals or money, I just needed someone to see me. He paused. A breeze stirred the flags behind him. If you're here today, and you feel like you've gone too far to come back, if you think no one cares anymore, I'm standing here to tell you something simple. He looked down, then back up. You still matter. Even when the system forgets, even when the silence gets loud, even when you've convinced yourself the world would keep turning without you. You matter. A hush fell again, the kind that wasn't empty, but full of recognition, full of truth. Marcus stepped down and rejoined the crowd. No applause followed. Just stillness. The kind that said, "We heard you, we felt you, we won't forget." And in that moment, surrounded by old friends, new beginnings, and the echo of steps taken through years of darkness, Marcus Ellison wasn't a case, a file, or a tragedy. He was a man, a father, a mentor, A survivor. A living, breathing reminder of the truth we all need to hear, that no one is too far gone. That healing is not a destination, but a journey, and that sometimes, just sometimes, all it takes to begin again is someone who's willing to say, "I see you," and mean it. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.